You people always try to act smarter than you are, Officer Daniels sneered as he held up Zara's passport under the fluorescent glare of JFK International's Terminal 4 checkpoint. But this is cute. It was just past 7 a.m., and the terminal hummed with the rhythm of early morning travelers, families dragging overstuffed suitcases, business people clutching coffee, and TSA agents barking instructions. But at lane 6, time stood still. Dr. Zarokoye stood tall, her navy blue blazer crisp despite the long night. A beige hijab framed her calm, unreadable face. In one hand, she held her rolling bag. In the other, a diplomatic passport, deep red, embossed with a gold eagle and the words, United States Department of State. Officer Ryan Daniels stared at it like it was a party trick. "I'm going to need you to step aside," he said, voice coated in suspicion. His hand lingered near his belt, the leather squeaking as he shifted. "This doesn't look right." Zar didn't blink. "It's authentic. Scan it." "Oh, I will," Daniels chuckled. "After we figure out where you got it." He motioned for a younger female officer, who hesitated before directing Zara to the secondary screening area. People in nearby lanes began to whisper. A woman holding a toddler stared wide-eyed. A man in a pilot's uniform shook his head and muttered, "This again." Zara moved without resistance, her heels clicking softly against the tile. As she sat down, she opened her phone and sent a short encrypted message. Just a number. Just a code. Then she tucked it away, folded her hands and waited. Daniels swaggered over, still flipping through her passport. He glanced at the visas and clearances, scoffing at the string of countries. Abuja, Cairo, Dubai. "Look, just because you got stamps doesn't mean you're James Bond." She didn't reply. Silence, she had learned, unsettled men like him. "So what's the story?" Daniels asked. "Fake diplomat? Sugar daddy in government? Or just another activist playing dress-up?" Zar met his eyes. "Call the number on the inside cover. Verify it through your system. It's standard protocol." Daniels ignored the suggestion, instead pulling out a pen and scribbling something onto a notepad. "You know," he said, lowering his voice, "you don't look the part." She tilted her head slightly. "What part is that?" "You're not exactly what I think of when I hear this envoy." The air grew colder. A few feet away, a supervisor noticed the interaction and frowned but didn't interfere. Zar kept her tone steady. "You're making a mistake." Daniels leaned in close. "I don't make mistakes. You people? You make noise. But in here, I decide who boards a plane." He turned away before she could respond, waving to a colleague to start a bag search. She watched as they unzipped her suitcase, pulling out neatly packed clothes, a travel-sized Quran, and a dossier labeled Classified JTCC Priority. The younger officer paused at that but quickly covered it back up. Zara closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she replayed the morning, the encrypted brief, the overnight directive, the warning that if she didn't board that plane, a political meeting in Europe could spiral into chaos. Her job wasn't just to attend. It was to deliver a physical copy of a de-escalation treaty, one that couldn't risk being hacked or digitally intercepted. She had done this dozens of times. Always under the radar. Always alone. But never like this. Never held back by someone who saw her skin first and her badge last. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. Daniels was now talking loudly to another officer, laughing. "Told you. Probably bought it online." People were staring. Someone pulled out a phone. A few took video. At the far end of the checkpoint, an older black woman leaned against her cane and whispered to her husband, "They always think we don't belong. Even when we do." Zara sat upright, her heart rate steady, her mind calculating. She checked the terminal clock. The deadline was near. The backup team would be monitoring. They'd warned her that if she failed to check in within 90 minutes of flight time, the red protocol would activate. She had 5 left. Then, just as Daniels cracked another joke, the airport lights dimmed for a second. A loud beep echoed from the terminal's PA system. "Attention all security staff," a robotic voice called. "Code 7. Immediate hold on Terminal 4 exit lanes. Stand by for federal intervention." Daniels stiffened. Around him, other officers looked at each other. Radios lit up. The supervisor began shouting, "Everyone freeze. Nobody moves." Zara finally smiled, ever so slightly, because she knew exactly what came next. The loudspeaker's announcement sliced through the air like a blade. Travelers froze mid-step. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones hovered mid-air, their cameras still pointed toward the security checkpoint. Officer Ryan Daniels' cocky smile evaporated instantly. "Code 7, he repeated, blinking. "That can't be right." Beside him, the junior officer who had helped search Zara's bag glanced around nervously. "Isn't that federal?" Daniels reached for his radio. "This is Officer Daniels at T4, Lane 6. Did I just hear a Code 7 confirmation?" The response came quickly, crisp and stern. "Confirmed. Full lockdown initiated. Remain in position. Federal response en route. Do not engage." Across the checkpoint, TSA supervisors barked into radios and phones. Yellow lights above each lane began to flash. Terminal 4's security barrier gates began to descend with a mechanical hum, locking access to the gates beyond. Zara Okoye didn't move. She didn't need to. Her work was done. She had followed protocol. Sent the code. Waited. Now the system she had served for over 15 years was responding, as it was trained to do. Quietly. Efficiently. With overwhelming force. Daniels, still clutching her passport like it was a piece of evidence, looked down at the document and suddenly felt a chill run up his spine. That little gold symbol beneath her name, the one he'd mocked earlier, was glowing faintly under the terminal's UV scanner. Not a fake. Not even close. He tried to recall his training manual, something about diplomatic seals and counterintelligence protocols. But it was too late. The terminal's automatic doors at the far end opened with a hiss, and 4 people in black tactical suits stepped in. They weren't TSA. They weren't local cops. They were federal. 2 men and 2 women, each one in sleek dark uniforms bearing a subtle insignia, JTCC, Joint Terrorism and Counterintelligence Command. Leading the group was Agent Morales, tall, Latinx, mid-40s, and not here to ask questions. His voice boomed through the checkpoint with clipped authority. "Where is Dr. Zara Okoye?" he demanded. Daniel stammered. I've got her detained for possible passport fraud." The reaction was immediate. "You did what?" Morales barked, storming toward him. "On what grounds?" "She looked suspicious," Daniels mumbled. "I thought the passport was forged." "Did you scan it?" Daniels looked at the ground. "Not yet." Morales turned sharply toward Zara, who stood up calmly and adjusted her blazer. "Dr. Okoye," he said with clear respect. "We apologize for the delay. Are you unharmed?" Zara nodded once. "I'm fine. But I'll miss the Prague briefing if I'm not in the air within the hour." Morales turned back to Daniels, whose face had turned pale. "Do you realize what you've done?" She was handpicked by the Secretary of State to hand-deliver a classified treaty proposal to EU defense ministers. This entire operation is now compromised because of your ego. Daniels opened his mouth but said nothing. "You didn't just delay a passenger," Morales continued, voice low and deadly. "You obstructed a high-level diplomatic operation protected under Title 22 of the United States Code. Do you even know what that means?" Daniels shook his head. "It means you could be charged with interfering in a federal mission. A felony," Morales snapped. "You thought her hijab made her suspicious? Or was it her accent? Her skin?" The terminal was quiet, but not still. Phones were still recording. Travelers whispered behind columns. Someone near baggage claim had already uploaded footage to Twitter. It was going viral. Zara stepped forward. "There's no need to arrest him." Morales turned to her. "You sure? He's a symptom, not the disease. Let the footage speak for itself. Let the system handle the backlash." Daniels, now visibly sweating, dropped her passport on the table like it was radioactive. I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I was just doing my job." Zara didn't flinch. "Your job is to protect this country, not to profile it." The younger female officer stepped forward, quietly handing Zara her bag. Her eyes held something close to shame. Your gate is still open. I'll walk you through. Zara nodded and turned to Morales. The handoff is still happening. Let command know I'll arrive 5 hours behind schedule. But I'm still making the delivery. He gave her a nod of admiration. Understood. As Zara walked away, escorted by the officer who had once searched her bag, Daniels slumped into a chair. The entire checkpoint watched him like a caged animal. The same mouths that had chuckled earlier were now frowning. A young black teenager in line whispered to his mother, "She's a real-life superhero." And for once, the silence said everything. Zara reached her gate just as boarding began. As she walked onto the plane, a flight attendant smiled and said, "Welcome aboard, Dr. Okoye." She sat down, placed her bag beneath the seat, and finally exhaled. Because even though the worst was over, the world she was flying into? It was about to change. The airplane cabin was cool and sterile, filled with the hush of businessmen scrolling through tablets and travelers whispering over duty-free catalogs. Dr. Zara Okoye sank into her seat in row 3, first class, government assigned, not because she sought luxury, but because time and proximity mattered in the world of international diplomacy. The moment she fastened her seatbelt, the exhaustion hit her. She hadn't slept in 27 hours. Her back still ached from sitting through the night's intel brief in D.C., and her ears rang slightly from the chaos at JFK. But her face betrayed none of it. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and began to mentally review her next move. The treaty she carried, stored in a secure compartment inside the lining of her hand luggage, was more than just ink on paper. It was the culmination of 6 months of covert negotiations between NATO allies and 3 African regional powers. Its purpose? To establish joint cyber defense protocols, especially for election infrastructure and resource-sensitive technologies. If leaked prematurely, the entire framework could collapse. If delayed beyond 48 hours, Eastern delegates might walk away from the deal. She had exactly 11 hours to reach Prague and brief the U.S. ambassador before the morning session. There was no room for error anymore. The mess at JFK had already cost them buffer time, and the political sensitivity of the case meant a single slip-up could make headlines around the world. A flight attendant approached discreetly, her badge reading Maria. "Dr. Okoye," she said softly, "we've been informed you may need a secure channel mid-flight. I've been asked to assist in case of any incoming communications." Zara looked up. "Thank you. Have clearance codes been authorized?" Maria handed her a laminated card. "Satellite access via seatcom secured. Your encrypted line will activate 90 minutes into the flight." Zara nodded. "Perfect." Maria leaned in, lowering her voice. "I also saw what happened at the airport. That officer, he was out of line." Zara gave a polite smile. "It happens more often than you think." Maria hesitated. "Still, the way you handled it? That was powerful." Zara didn't respond, but she gave a single nod of appreciation. Sometimes, silence made a deeper point than any speech could. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Zara's thoughts drifted, not to work, but to memory. She had been born in Abuja but raised in New Jersey from the age of 6. Her father, a professor of political history, used to tell her stories of global peace talks and Cold War standoffs over breakfast. Her mother, a nurse, gave her the iron discipline and empathy she wore like armor. Zara had joined the State Department young. She excelled in field assignments, fluent in 3 languages, razor-sharp intuition, and the ability to stay calm under pressure. But she was also a black Muslim woman in a world not built for her. That meant enduring endless second-guessing, bureaucratic erasure, and yes, sometimes outright hostility. But today had shaken even her. The sneer, the mockery, the assumption of fraud. It wasn't new, but it had been louder, somehow, and more public. She opened her laptop and reviewed the flight manifest for Prague's diplomatic convoy. There was one name circled on her list, Ambassador Krisner, representing one of the EU nations still on the fence. He didn't trust American surveillance policies. It would be Zara's job to reassure him, not just with the treaty, but with her credibility. But how do you assure a skeptic that the country that just humiliated you still deserves to be trusted? Her encrypted tablet pinged. Incoming, Envoy Red Channel. She entered her passcode. From JTCC Command. Subject, Incident Follow-up JFK Terminal. Dr. Okoye? Full review initiated. Footage from multiple sources confirms unlawful detainment. Statement from TSA Office of Professional Conduct pending. Officer R. Daniels placed on immediate suspension without pay. Director Cleary requests brief call en route to Prague. Intel suggests that your presence in the media is trending across platforms. Possible narrative spin. Black diplomat detained by racist TSA agent before classified mission. Recommend staying ahead of press with your version of events. Zara frowned. This was exactly what she didn't want. To become the story instead of the envoy. But she also understood something deeper. Power thrives in silence, and this time, her silence might be interpreted as compliance. If her story was going to be told, it had to be on her terms. She tapped a message back. Confirmed. Will brief Director Cleary during seek-com window. Recommend press angle remain focused on system error, not individual drama. Mission must stay the lead. She closed the tablet and turned to the window. The clouds outside looked soft and endless, but she knew better. There were storms ahead. And the world, now watching, expected her to fly through them like a bullet. At exactly 36,000 feet above the Atlantic, while the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers drifted into sleep, the world below was wide awake and on fire. In New York, a 36-second cell phone video titled, "TSA Officer Profiles Black Diplomat," had gone viral on Twitter within an hour of upload. By the time the plane reached international airspace, it had already been reshared by journalists, senators, and social justice activists. The video showed Officer Ryan Daniels interrogating Zara, mocking her accent, and tossing her passport aside moments before federal agents entered frame. On TikTok, creators layered captions over the footage. He messed with the wrong woman. Dr. Zara Okoye deserves an apology and a damn statue. How many qualified black women get stopped like this? This time she had power. Hashtags were trending across platforms. Hashtag Let Zara Aboard. Hashtag Flying All Black. Hashtag TSA Profiling Exposed. Hashtag Diplomat Detained. By noon Eastern Standard Time, The Washington Post had published a headline. U.S. diplomat delayed by TSA racial profiling, mission almost jeopardized. And in the Situation Room of the White House, the National Security Advisor was pacing with her phone in one hand and her other hand clenched in a fist. "Get me Cleary on the line," she barked to her aide. "Now." Meanwhile, in the belly of Flight 417, Dr. Zara Okoye sat calmly with a noise-canceling headset over her ears, her tray table lowered, and her encrypted laptop open. On her screen was a split video call. To the left, Director Cleary, her superior at the Joint Terrorism and Counterintelligence Command. Bald, sharp-eyed, with the weary face of a man who'd seen too many political messes. To the right, U.S. Ambassador to Prague, a tired-looking woman named Ambassador Lillian Brett, already dressed in a navy suit with the Czech Republic's flag pin on her lapel. "Zara," Cleary said first and foremost, "I'm sorry. This never should have happened. And for what it's worth, the administration is furious." Zara didn't flinch. Then they can start by asking how many other travelers don't have the badge or rank to fight back. Brett nodded solemnly. "You're the headline across Europe already. They're calling it the embarrassment before the envoy. But the bigger issue, are you still on track to deliver the treaty in person tomorrow morning?" "Yes," Zara said. "I land in 6 hours. Car pickup has been arranged. I'll go straight to the embassy." Cleary glanced at his notes. There's something else. The Czech defense rep, Krisner, was planning to walk out of tomorrow's session. Zara's eyebrows lifted slightly. "He found out about the incident at JFK," Brett added. "Said if even your diplomats are being humiliated, how can Europe trust American leadership to uphold international dignity?" Zara leaned forward. "Then let him meet the woman they tried to humiliate. I'll give him his reason to stay." Cleary exhaled with some relief. "That's what I wanted to hear." I'll have a statement drafted. You don't have to say anything to the press if you don't want to. But if you choose to speak, your words will echo. Zara hesitated. When we use injustice for attention, we risk turning trauma into theater. Agreed, Brett said. But if the world's watching, maybe they need to see how leadership responds with grace. Zara didn't reply immediately. Her eyes flicked to a headline floating in the corner of her secure screen. Black diplomat delayed while on peace mission. Underneath, a photo of her face from the airport, serious, composed, surrounded by federal agents. Let's finish the mission first, she said quietly. Then we can decide how loud to be. Cleary smiled faintly. That's why you're the one we trust. The call ended, and Zara finally removed the headset. She turned her attention to the small window beside her and stared into the ocean of clouds illuminated by the moon. She took a breath. She wasn't angry anymore. Not visibly. But a quiet storm brewed behind her calm exterior. This wasn't about her feelings. This was about every black girl who got stared down at customs. Every hijabi woman, randomly selected 5 times in one trip. Every educated immigrant who had to prove they were more than their accent. This mission, this treaty, suddenly felt even bigger than before. It was about what the world saw when it looked at power, and who they allowed to carry it. Back in JFK, Officer Ryan Daniels sat alone in an empty conference room inside TSA headquarters, his badge suspended, his phone confiscated, and his union rep on the way. A CNN broadcast played on the screen in front of him. It showed Zara's face in split screen beside the White House press secretary. He rubbed his temples, shaking his head. He'd thought he was stopping a fraud. Instead, he'd become the cautionary tale in every diversity training PowerPoint for the next decade. The descent into Václav Havel Airport was smooth, the wheels of the plane kissing the tarmac with calculated ease. It was still dark outside, Prague just waking up, but the diplomatic lane at arrivals was already active. Zara gathered her blazer, zipped her carry-on, and gave a quick nod to the attendant waiting to escort her through immigration. Even before the flight door opened, she had re-entered mission mode. She stepped off the plane with elegance, but her posture was coiled steel, alert, measured, graceful. A black sedan with tinted windows idled outside the VIP terminal. Her name was already on the sign the driver held, and within minutes, she was en route to the U.S. Embassy. Inside the car, she reviewed her notes one last time. Ambassador Krisner, one of Europe's most conservative diplomats. Former military intelligence. Paranoid about surveillance, skeptical of U.S. data sharing, and rumored to be on the verge of walking away from the treaty altogether. He didn't dislike Americans. He distrusted American power. And today, he would meet the black American woman representing that power in its rawest, most fragile form. The irony wasn't lost on her. The driver, an embassy staffer named Tomas, peeked at her through the mirror. They're all talking about you, he said in heavily accented English. Zara raised an eyebrow. Here too. Czech News picked up the footage from JFK. One of our newspapers called you, the woman who walked through fire. She offered a polite smile but said nothing. Let them write what they wanted. Words didn't matter. Signatures did. By the time they arrived at the U.S. Embassy in Prague, the sky had begun to lighten. The marble structure gleamed under the haze of morning fog. Armed security checked her ID, nodded briskly, and opened the gate. Inside, Ambassador Lillian Brett was already waiting in the lobby. Briefing room's ready, she said, extending a hand. Krisner's early. He's been here for 20 minutes. Zara didn't miss a beat. Then let's not keep him waiting. They entered the embassy's briefing room together, a sleek glass-walled conference space with a large oak table, a digital projector already humming in the background, and coffee steaming at the edge of the room. Sitting near the head of the table was Ambassador Krisner. He was older than she expected, perhaps in his late 60s, but with eyes that missed nothing. His posture was perfect, his expression unreadable. Zara approached, hand extended. Dr. Zara Okoye, U.S. State Department. He shook her hand but said nothing at first. Just observed her. Then, you don't look like the stories, he said, his voice gravelly. Zara kept her tone neutral. I don't represent stories. I represent facts. That earned the faintest flicker of a smirk. Ambassador Brett took her seat. We appreciate your flexibility, Krisner. Dr. Okoye is here to personally walk you through the final draft of the treaty. We believe. I've read the draft, Krisner interrupted. What I'm not sure of is your commitment. Or your control over your own government. You ask us to share cyber defense infrastructure, yet your own diplomats get blocked at airports. Zara didn't flinch. She pulled out the physical document, still sealed in its secured folder, and laid it on the table. With all due respect, Ambassador, the incident at JFK wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a test. And my presence here, on time, intact, and still willing to engage, is your answer. Krisner leaned back, scrutinizing her. You expect us to trust a nation whose internal divisions are so visible? Zara's voice was calm but firm. I expect you to trust that diplomacy is built not on perfection, but resilience. What happened in New York was shameful. But what happened after, that federal agents moved, that the mission was preserved, that I am here now, shows the system still works. Flawed, but responsive. There was a beat of silence. Then Krisner said, Do you know what the press here calls you? Zara nodded. The woman who walked through fire. Do you think that makes you more persuasive? He asked. She met his gaze without blinking. I think it makes me more human. That silenced the room. Krisner looked down at the treaty. Then at Ambassador Brett. I'll need 48 hours. No promises yet. Zara reached for her bag, retrieving a USB. This drive contains a side letter agreement, one you suggested at the Geneva round. It provides bilateral auditing clauses for the Cyber Shield protocols. It's unofficial, but it signals we're listening. Krisner took it, slowly. You studied my objections. I study everything that threatens peace, she replied. He stood. So do I. Then, without a handshake or a smile, he turned and walked out. Zara remained still, watching him disappear through the embassy hallway. Ambassador Brett let out a slow breath. That was the best-case version of him. Zara nodded. He won't say yes yet, but I think he'll talk. After the news cycle you've had, Brett added, he'd be a fool not to. Zara looked toward the window, the sun now climbing behind Prague's Gothic rooftops. She had crossed oceans, dodged slander, and stood her ground against cynics with decades of power. But now came the hardest part, waiting. Because diplomacy wasn't drama. It was patience. Still, in that quiet room, surrounded by evidence of centuries of conflict and compromise, Dr. Zara Okoye knew something else too. The world had watched her board the plane. Now, it would watch to see if her voice could carry the treaty all the way home. It was supposed to be a moment of calm. After 5 straight hours of debriefs, intelligence syncs, and side-door diplomacy, Dr. Zara Okoye finally returned to the guest suite on the 3rd floor of the U.S. Embassy in Prague. The room was modest, cream walls, a small desk, and a narrow balcony that looked out over the sleepy cobbled streets of Mala Strana. She dropped her bag on the bed and peeled off her blazer with a heavy sigh. Her shoulders ached. Her mind was still spinning from Ambassador Krisner's stone-faced departure. 48 hours wasn't a no, but it wasn't a yes either. And now, the world wanted to talk. Her embassy-issued phone was vibrating non-stop on the desk. Missed calls from Washington. 2 voicemails from Director Cleary. A message marked urgent from the Deputy Secretary of State's office. And then there was the media. CNN, Al Jazeera, NPR, even France 24. They all wanted the same thing. An exclusive. Zara sat down and opened her encrypted tablet. A new headline dominated her custom feed. Diplomat turned hero, Dr. Zara Okoye faces racism, then delivers peace, New York Times. She grimaced. Another screen showed her face, captured mid-conversation with the embassy staff earlier that day, broadcast on CNN International. Below her image was a quote she didn't remember saying. I wasn't detained. I was disrespected. There's a difference. She hadn't said those exact words. Not like that. But in today's media economy, exactness didn't matter. Story did. She picked up the phone and called Director Cleary. He answered on the second ring. Zara, he said, How's Prague treating you? Tense, but stable, she replied. Prisoners circling. But I need to talk about this media thing. It's spiraling. Cleary sighed. I figured that would hit you hard. We tried to manage the narrative, but once that video hit the public, we lost control. Your face is everywhere. You're trending on TikTok as the TSA queen. Zara pinched the bridge of her nose. I didn't do this for attention. I know, Cleary said. But here's the hard part. You're no longer just a diplomat. You're a symbol now. People are rallying around you. Civil rights orgs are using your image in campaigns. TSA has launched an internal probe. Even Congress wants to hear from you. I'm not a political prop, she replied sharply. I'm a government envoy. My job is treaties, not trending topics. I agree. But optics are part of the job now, like it or not. There was a pause. Listen, Cleary continued, more gently now. You don't owe anyone a public statement. But if you're willing to speak, even just once, it could help. You'd be taking control of your own story. Zara looked out the window at the fog-covered rooftops of Prague. She thought about all the women who'd messaged her. The student from Nairobi who wrote, "You made me believe I could lead." The Muslim girl from Minneapolis who said, "I cried watching you walk past that man like he didn't exist." I'll think about it, Zara said. But I'm not doing it for image. It has to mean something. Understood, Cleary said. And for what it's worth, the president saw the footage this morning. He asked about you personally. Zara raised an eyebrow. Really? He said, quote, "She held her dignity like a damn general." Zara gave a small, dry chuckle. Dignity was the only thing they didn't try to scan. They both laughed for a beat, the kind of laugh that sits just above exhaustion. When she ended the call, she walked to the mirror above the dresser. Her reflection stared back, tired but unbroken. She wasn't used to being seen this way, as a face, not a function. For most of her career, she had excelled in the background. She translated between governments. She analyzed intelligence briefs. She crossed borders unnoticed. But now the world had noticed. She turned from the mirror and stepped out onto the narrow balcony. The evening chill kissed her cheeks. Church bells echoed faintly in the distance. Across the city, windows lit up one by one as people returned home. Zara wondered how many of them had read about her. How many had seen the clip, debated it over dinner, or reposted it with slogans and hashtags. She didn't ask to be the symbol of something larger. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about her anymore. Maybe it was about every tired, qualified, overchecked black traveler who had been treated like a suspect. Maybe it was for every diplomat who never made it past customs. For every mission that had been quietly delayed or worse, quietly destroyed. And now here she was, mission intact, but spirit weighed. Inside, her tablet pinged again. Incoming, press invitation, Global Diplomacy Summit Panel. We invite Dr. Zara Okoye to speak on the topic, Bridging Borders in a Fractured World. She stared at the title. Fractured World. Yes, that sounded about right. But even fractured things could be rebuilt, if enough people were willing to carry the pieces across the sky. The next morning in Prague broke with golden light seeping through sheer embassy curtains, but Dr. Zara Okoye hadn't slept. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling, her mind running marathons. Not about treaties or Krisner's decision, not about protocol or damage control, but about identity. Somewhere between being mocked in an American airport and hailed as a global symbol in Europe, she'd lost the quiet invisibility she'd once treasured. She missed being just another diplomat in a trench coat walking into Geneva summits. She missed the emails with subject lines that didn't include her name in bold caps. She missed walking through airports without wondering who was recording her now. But more than anything, she missed the silence. Not the passive kind, but the empowering quiet of knowing her work spoke louder than her name. Now, she was being asked to speak louder than her work. As she sat at the small breakfast table in her suite, sipping thick Turkish coffee the embassy chef had kindly brewed just for her, she opened her inbox again. The messages were relentless. One was from PBS. They wanted to feature her in a segment on black women in diplomacy. Another was from a civil rights group called Global Equitas, asking her to appear at their International Forum on Racial Bias in Travel and Border Control. There was even a message from her old university, Columbia, inviting her to deliver the commencement speech next spring. She read each one slowly, carefully, respectfully. But she didn't respond. Not yet. Across the room, her personal phone, a second line few people knew, vibrated on the dresser. She stood up, walked over and picked it up. Mama calling. She let out a soft breath and answered. Zara, her mother's voice came, warm and rooted in their native Igbo accent. You haven't slept. I can hear it. Zara smiled faintly. You always could. There was a long pause. Her mother didn't ask about the treaty or the press or the airport incident. She simply said, I watched the video. Everyone in our street group chat has seen it. And every one of them called me this week just to say they're proud you carry our name. Zara swallowed a lump in her throat. That's not why I did any of this. I know, her mother said. You never liked the spotlight. You were the girl who whispered in 3 languages but shouted in none. Zara chuckled lightly. Still am. But the world needs a little of your whisper now, Mama said gently, even if it echoes through microphones. Zara sat back down at the table and closed her eyes. She was 38 years old. An Ivy League graduate. A career diplomat. A senior intelligence liaison. She had de-escalated coups, secured cyberpacks, even walked through active protests in West Africa to mediate political prisoners' release. But nothing, not even war zones, had prepared her for what it felt like to become visible. Because visibility, for a black woman in power, wasn't just attention. It was scrutiny. It was burden. It was unrequested leadership in rooms you didn't build. I don't know what to say to them, Zara confessed. To the media. To the women reaching out. To the kids holding posters of me like I'm some kind of Rosa Parks 2.0. Her mother's voice softened. You don't need to say everything. Just speak your truth. One piece at a time. The rest will find its way. Zara nodded slowly. One piece. Before she could say more, there was a knock at the door. She thanked her mother, promised to call back, and ended the call. A staffer entered holding a tablet. Dr. Okoye, sorry to interrupt, but Krisner's office just sent word. He's asked to reconvene at 3 p.m. today, same room. He didn't say why. Zara took the tablet and read the attached message. Requesting clarification on Clause 4B. Considering possible re-entry into joint proposal. Will confirm attendance shortly. It wasn't a confirmation, but it was momentum. Tell the ambassador I'll be ready, Zara said, rising to her feet. As the door closed again, she turned toward the mirror on the wall. Her hair was neatly wrapped, her blouse pressed, her posture perfect. But behind her eyes, something stirred, a fire trying not to look like a burden. She took out her notebook and opened to a blank page. At the top, she wrote, what I wanted to say but never did. Then she paused, pen hovering over paper, heart steady. And finally she wrote, you didn't stop me. You only reminded me who I've been walking for all along. She closed the notebook, slid it into her bag, and began preparing for the most important conversation of her career. Because maybe it wasn't about being a hero. Maybe it was just about being heard. At precisely 2:55 p.m., Dr. Zara Okoye stepped into the now familiar glass conference room at the U.S. Embassy in Prague. She wore a slate gray suit and a simple lapel pin that bore the insignia of the Joint Task Counterterrorism Command. Her hijab, a silky black with faint silver threads, was neatly wrapped. Her eyes, however, were sharper than ever, focused, alert, carrying the weight of both the mission and the moment. On the table sat a single folder, the treaty proposal she had carried across an ocean and through a storm of doubt, profiling, and global headlines. Moments later, Ambassador Krisner entered, this time alone. He didn't bring an aide. He didn't offer small talk. He simply walked in, pulled the chair opposite Zara, and sat down. I've reviewed Clause 4B again, he said, placing his reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. It still concerns me. Zara opened her copy of the treaty and turned to the section in question. Clause 4B, Shared biometric data access protocols between participating nations for cross-border cybercrime investigations. Krisner tapped the line with one blunt finger. We've seen what American agencies do with data. We've seen what they lose. You ask us to open our systems, but will your side do the same? Zara nodded slowly. We will. But I also understand why it feels like a one-sided window. Krisner narrowed his eyes. Feelings are irrelevant. Laws are not. She met his gaze. Then let me explain what's at stake, legally and practically. He leaned back, hands clasped. Zara took a breath and began. Clause 4B isn't about surveillance. It's about speed. The attacks we're seeing now, ransomware networks, disinformation campaigns, they move faster than paper trails. If we're not sharing biometric identifiers in real time, we're weeks behind every hacker, every fake diplomat, every voter database breach. Krisner listened in silence. She continued, this clause gives us a shared language. A way to say, this person you caught in Brno last week? He's the same one we spotted in Lagos last month. It's not about exposing citizens. It's about protecting sovereignty. Krisner raised an eyebrow. And yet you, Dr. Okoye, were nearly prevented from completing your mission by your own border agents. What does that say about your systems? Zara didn't flinch. It says even the strongest system has blind spots. But when those blind spots are exposed, what matters is how quickly they're corrected. She folded her hands. What happened to me isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a case study in why cooperation matters. One biased officer delayed a mission that took months to prepare. What if the stakes had been nuclear codes? Or chemical weapons? You think I walked through that checkpoint alone. But the truth is I carried all of us. This treaty. Krisner didn't reply for a long time. Then quietly he said, you speak like a soldier. Zara smiled faintly. I grew up with a father who taught political theory at the kitchen table and a mother who could outlast any storm without ever raising her voice. In this world, survival is a form of diplomacy. The old diplomat let out a low chuckle, dry, almost reluctant. You're not what I expected, he admitted. Most people aren't, she replied. Another beat of silence passed between them. Then he reached for the treaty, flipped to the end, and retrieved a silver pen from his jacket pocket. He signed the last page. One signature. Crisp, final, no hesitation. I'll bring it to the council myself, Krisner said. Let the other holdouts follow my lead or be left behind. Zara sat up straighter. You've made the right call. He stood. No. I made the necessary one. As he turned to leave, he paused at the doorway. I heard you've been invited to speak at that summit next month, Global Diplomacy Forum. Are you going? Zara considered his question carefully. Maybe, but I'm not going to speak about what happened to me. He raised a brow. No, she said. I'll speak about what happens next. Because every time someone tells a story like mine, it shouldn't stop with pain. It should end in policy. Krisner nodded slowly. That is what leadership sounds like. Then he was gone. Zara sat alone, surrounded by the hum of silence and possibility. The treaty lay signed before her. But this moment, this quiet room after the storm, was not victory. It was responsibility. Her phone vibrated with a secure message. Mission status, successfully signed. Proceed to debrief. She let out a slow breath, leaned back and closed her eyes. It wasn't over. It had just begun. The jet touched down at Dulles International Airport just past 6 p.m., 4 days after Dr. Zara Okoye had left on what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic courier mission. But nothing about her return was routine now. A security convoy was already waiting. No lines. No questions. She was escorted directly to a black SUV flanked by 2 Homeland Security officers. Her bags were loaded behind her. Even the escort agent, middle-aged, white, gruff, offered a respectful nod and avoided eye contact. This wasn't fear. It was reverence. Caution. A subtle acknowledgement that they all knew who she was now. Inside the car, her phone buzzed with a dozen notifications. At the top was a message from Director Cleary. Welcome back, Dr. Okoye. President approved your commendation for treaty success. Call me when you land. Also, media's waiting. Up to you when, or you respond. Zara leaned her head back against the seat. The city passed by in a blur of taillights and window reflections. Washington, D.C., with its imposing marble buildings and stained glass politics, had never felt heavier. Or more fragile. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video. She tapped play. It was a clip from a live stream at Howard University. Young black women standing outside the law school holding signs that read, "She carried a treaty and a target. Zara walked so we could be seen. Honor the mission. Hear her story." The image hit harder than she expected. These women, most barely in their 20s, didn't know her personally. They hadn't read the treaty. They had no idea how exhausting international diplomacy could be. But they understood something deeper. They knew what it meant to be doubted on sight. They knew what it meant to be dismissed before you even opened your mouth. And now, they were holding space for her. Not as a victim. Not as a celebrity. As a mirror. The SUV slowed and turned into the underground entrance of the State Department's secured building. An aide waited beside the elevator. She offered Zara a smile. Press is outside. CNN, NBC, BBC, all of them. We've prepped a room if you want to speak. Or we can take you straight to your office. Zara didn't answer right away. She looked at her own reflection in the tinted car window. She wasn't tired. Not anymore. She was clear. And when the world was watching, clarity was a responsibility. "I'll speak," she said finally. 15 minutes later, she stood at a small podium inside the press briefing room. A neutral blue backdrop behind her. No flags. No distractions. Just her, a mic, and a sea of cameras blinking red. She didn't read a statement. Didn't fumble with notes. She spoke from the center of her chest. 4 days ago, she began, I left this country carrying a treaty designed to protect our global infrastructure from digital threats. I returned with a signature that represents international cooperation and shared resilience. She paused. But somewhere between those 2 points, I became a headline. The room was still. Journalists leaned forward. I want to be clear, what happened to me at JFK was not unique. It was visible. That's different. It was visible because someone recorded it. Visible because I was lucky enough to be protected by a badge, a rank, and a mission critical enough to activate backup. But most people who look like me, don't get that backup. She took a steadying breath. They walk away ashamed, silenced, angry, and unheard. She looked directly into the nearest camera. I was not detained. I was diminished. And that distinction matters. Because detainment is procedural. Diminishment is systemic. A low murmur moved through the room. Zara continued, her voice unwavering. I didn't come here to shame individuals. This isn't about one officer or one airport. It's about every point of contact where dignity gets filtered through fear. Where identity becomes suspicion. Where uniform trumps empathy. She held up the signed treaty. This document represents what's possible when countries move beyond fear. Beyond bias. Beyond history. And I hope the system I serve will apply the same ambition to its own backyard. Silence. Respectful. Sure. Then she said the final words that would later be quoted around the world. I did not speak today because I wanted attention. I spoke because silence would have made me complicit in every story like mine that ends without justice. We cannot build peace overseas if we ignore injustice at home. And with that, she stepped away from the podium. No questions. No press spin. Just truth left to echo. As she walked out, a woman from one of the networks whispered, that wasn't a speech, that was a movement in one voice. Back in the hallway, Zara found herself finally able to breathe. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply nodded to herself. Because she hadn't spoken for applause. She had spoken because some stories must speak themselves, through the people brave enough to become their vessels. The evening after her speech, Dr. Zara Okoye returned to her apartment for the first time in nearly a week. No motorcade. No flashing lights. Just the soft shuffle of her keys and the gentle click of the door unlocking. The silence was a gift. She stepped inside and was greeted by the familiar scent of lemon balm and jasmine, her comfort scents. She set her bag down and peeled off her heels, walking barefoot across the hardwood floor to the window that overlooked the city. Washington buzzed below. Neon streaked the streets, headlights flickered, and voices floated up from cafe patios and street corners like a low symphony of lives colliding. Zara stood there for a while, her arms folded, the last rays of the sun cutting through her silhouette. The treaty was done. Her words had rippled. But she knew this was only the surface. Because even treaties, signed, sealed, and celebrated, meant nothing without trust. And trust couldn't be drafted in a negotiation room. It had to be lived. That night, she finally responded to some of the messages that had flooded her inbox. Not the reporters or ambassadors, but the quiet ones. The overlooked ones. She wrote back to the Nigerian-American girl in Ohio who said TSA pulled her into secondary screening every time she traveled. She replied to the Muslim mother in London whose son cried the first time a security dog sniffed his backpack in front of his classmates. She sent voice notes to 3 black women from Johannesburg, Toronto, and Atlanta who said they saw her on their TV and, for once, didn't feel invisible. Zara didn't have answers for all of them. But she gave them acknowledgement. And sometimes, acknowledgement is the first language of healing. Later that week, she met with a group of graduate students at Georgetown, young women and men studying diplomacy, international relations, law. They asked her tough questions, real questions. What would you have done if the agents hadn't come for you? How do you keep serving a country that forgets to protect you? Do you think we'll ever stop being seen as threats before we're seen as thinkers? Zara had paused before answering. I don't have faith in perfection, she'd said slowly. I have faith in progress. And progress doesn't come from people waiting to be invited to the table. It comes from people who bring their own chairs and stay seated when it gets uncomfortable. They nodded. Some smiled. A few teared up. She ended that session with a final thought. The gate I was stopped at is the same gate millions pass through every day. Some get questioned. Some get waved through. Some get pulled aside for no reason but their name, their skin, their silence. But here's the truth. Every gate we pass through becomes a chance to either close it tighter or push it wider. I chose to push. And push she did. The treaty was ratified the following month with full cooperation from all NATO and African bloc members. It was named the Okoye-Krisner Protocol, not by her suggestion, but by Krisner's. The press caught on. A New York op-ed read, sometimes diplomacy isn't written by the loudest leaders, but by the quietest woman who refused to be erased. Back at home, Officer Ryan Daniels was reassigned permanently, his record flagged for bias intervention training. No criminal charges, but a clear consequence. And Zara? She returned to work like nothing had happened. No fanfare. No victory lap. Just files, meetings, and another passport awaiting another mission. Because that's who she was. And because real power doesn't shout. It walks in quietly, signs the papers, delivers the message, and leaves the room better than it found it. Now, over to you. What gate have you been stopped at? What story did they try to silence in you? And more importantly, how will you choose to push? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a real conversation. Not just about what happened to Zara, but about how often it happens, and how we can start building systems that see people fully before they scan their bags. If this story made you feel something, if it challenged your thinking or reminded you that quiet resistance is still resistance, then do me a favor. Like this video so others see it. Share it with someone who's ever been made to feel small for simply existing. And subscribe to the channel for more real stories that expose, heal, and ignite the change we all need to see. Because this story may be over, but the next one? It could be yours.